Um, that is all I have, and I'm very happy to welcome up our most beloved Jeopardy contestant, radio personality, Elena Passarello.
I'm never going to live that Jeopardy thing down. I know, and we haven't talked about the fact that one of the questions I got wrong involved Cincinnati, which I remember when I was up there getting the question about Cincinnati wrong, I actually thought of Leah and Alyssa and all the Cincinnati people, and I was like, oh shit, I'm not getting asked back to Swanee, like, ever again. But speaking of, I'm so glad that I got asked back to Swanee. When I finished last year, which was my first year here, the first thing I said to David, my partner, who I'm about to tell you way too much about, was I can't believe how lucky I am that I got to do that. And then this year, when I got to come back, for the first day, I just couldn't believe how lucky I was. But the thing that I felt so lucky about this time was I got to see these people that my heart just completely opened up to, these great writers, these great organizers, Gwen and Adam and Leah. And when I saw all the staff members were coming back, I was like, ah! It was so great to see everybody and, all the writers who were here last time that are here now. And then there's all these new folks. I feel like my world is getting smaller and smaller, especially since 2020. And last year I got this opportunity for it to just expand and for my brain to expand and for my reading list to expand, and I will always be so grateful for that. So thank you so much for that. And thank you all for listening or pretending to listen. That's totally fine too. What an honor too to be the opening act for Mr. MCR, who's coming in just about 20 minutes. Okay. So, all right, I'm going to read this thing. I haven't read it out loud before, so my eyes will be buried in the page, despite what that email this morning said about maybe I might have something memorized. I won't. This is from a book that I'm working on about the spotty legacy of Elvis Presley. I'm doing like 4 big, long essays. And they're about, I'm kind of trying on these opportunities that still exist 45 years after Elvis's death. He died 45 years ago next month. To remember him, even though, I was never alive when he was. I'm only remembering this memory that's been sort of perpetuated for my entire existence and for the existences of a lot of people. This is the most lighthearted essay in the book. The thing that I try on is getting married by an Elvis impersonator, which would have been cool if I would have gotten married to an Elvis impersonator. Maybe Ginny, maybe I'll add that to my editor. Maybe I'll add that 5th essay. Okay, so here we go. You need to know nothing. It's called Wear My Ring Around Your Neck. And thank you so much again. Elvis Presley's only wedding day began in the desert and in the dark. Long before dawn, on May 1st, 1967, he and fiancée Priscilla Beaulieu hopped the back fence of his Palm Springs home. Reporters were camped out front and boarded a jet on loan from Frank Sinatra. The couple landed a few miles south of the Las Vegas Strip and rushed to the Clark County Courthouse, where they filed for a marriage license shortly after 3 in the morning. It was a Monday. And by breakfast, they were officially husband and wife, having exchanged vows over an 8-minute service in a suite of the Aladdin Hotel. As soon as the ceremony began, it was over, Priscilla says in her memoir, Elvis and Me. We were both so nervous, we hadn't slept all night long. The Nevada court justice presiding over their union remembered a terrified pair, a 32-year-old first-time groom who was almost bawling, and a bride 3 weeks shy of her 23rd birthday who could barely speak. They appeared dazed but happy at the postnuptial press conference, both sporting copious eye makeup and teased dyed coiffes that had inches to their heights. The reception's 6-tiered wedding cake, which caused a sensation with its $3,200 price tag, stands even taller. Though he and I share the same initials, a Southern upbringing, and a childish spazziness that followed us into adulthood, I am no Elvis Presley. This might be the understatement of the century, as Elvis was obviously not a late Gen Xer feminist with limited musical ability and no public life to speak of. What's more, my hair is quite flat. I've never put a banana on a sandwich, and I managed not to marry anyone for all of my 30s. In fact, I was almost 42, the same age Elvis was when he died when I finally got hitched. I met my partner, David, in the early 2000s when I was fresh out of college. And despite his sustained awesomeness and the decades-long campaign wielded by both our families, I never felt the need to make an honest man out of him. Even in February 2020, when we flew to Las Vegas for an irreverent leap day elopement and booked Graceland Wedding Chapel's Viva Las Vegas package of ceremony, boutonniere, and Elvis minister for just $299, photos sold separately, I still harbored nagging doubts about the institution. The main trait Presley and I do share, it seems, is this ambivalence toward matrimony. Depending on the temperature of the biography or the tell-all book, Elvis wanted either to postpone his vows to Priscilla or never to have married her at all. Peter Guralnick, the definitive Presley historian, attributes the Vegas wedding to Colonel Tom Parker, who had been pursuing Tom Hanks in the movie, who had been pursuing opportunities around town for the singer's career reboot. By 1967, Presley's star was somewhat on the wane. His image needed sprucing too after a drug-addled fall halted production on his 25th movie, Clambake. Reporters and industry types needed to be distracted, so according to Priscilla, the Colonel told Elvis, either you should get married or go on. And this rousing pep talk is what prompted him to knock on Priscilla's bedroom door at Graceland and slip a 3.5-carat yellow diamond framed in smaller gems on her finger while she was in her bathrobe. My proposal to David, if you can call it that, was even more nonchalant, and bathrobes were also involved. I walked into our bedroom one Wednesday in late 2019 holding not a ring, but a bowl of leftover stir-fry. David was dressing for his bartending shift, stepping into a pair of Dickies that were basically the same size as the ones he wore when we started sniffing around each other at the turn of the last century. I'd spent the morning behind the closed door of my office, which had recently transformed into an Elvis research bunker. I spent all my days there following a vague hunch that Presley was a Rosetta Stone who could decode my tendency to fangirl over wounded and problematic rock stars, a devotion that began when I got my first cassette boombox and subscription to Spin. I had recently stood with the crowds shout out to Spin. I had recently stood with the crowds outside Graceland on the 42nd anniversary of Elvis's death. I'd watched dozens of impersonators strut their stuff in competitions across the country. I'd even spent the night in his teenage bedroom, where the walls are covered with hundreds of lipstick kisses and the guest book is warped with dried tears. And every week I spent on the road or in the bunker brought me closer to outliving Elvis, who died at 42 the year before I was born. The wedding idea just popped into my head that Wednesday while I chomped on my reheated lunch. Why not get married like Elvis did? Or at least near where he did and by someone who sorta looks like he did. This Vegas spectacle was the first wedding option that ever made sense to me. I figured it could be both a secret and a half joke, and the other half would be part of my weird Elvis project. So, a work thing, and we wouldn't have to tell our parents if it was for work, right? Maybe I could even write it off on my taxes. These were not jokes. Besides, since we'd crossed into middle age and our relationship had grown old enough to enlist, it felt slightly silly to keep calling a man on the verge of 50 my boyfriend. All this is what made me spring from my office chair, take my stir-fry into the bedroom, and pop the question. What if we got Elvis married in Las Vegas? I asked him while he buttoned his pants. If we did it on Leap Day, we'd only have an anniversary every 4 years. When's Leap Day? David asked me. He never knows when any holiday falls, except sometimes the 4th of July. I told him and added that according to an Amy Adams movie I once watched on an airplane, February 29th was also the rare day in which Irish women could formally propose to their boyfriends. But neither of us is the least bit Irish, but I think the detail gave my offer extra heft. And he accepted me right away on the single condition that he wouldn't be forced to wear a tie at the wedding or ever again. And with that, our betrothal was set before I'd even finished my leftovers. An incendiary biography from 1998 quotes a Graceland staffer who walked in on Elvis days before his Vegas wedding and found him weeping. "I don't have a choice." Thank you. I should say there's another long essay in the book where I try to become the first successful female Elvis impersonator, and it is not going well. So thank you. I needed that applause after what I've been through. Presley's own stepbrother said that Elvis tried to take too many pills to escape the marriage, which the rest of the family denies, but most of his inner circle doubted Presley's ability to commit. His father, Vernon, told Good Housekeeping in 1978 that Elvis realized after the wedding that he didn't really want to be married. And in 2017, Priscilla told an Australian interviewer that she wasn't sure if he was ever cut out for it. He may not have been cut out for marriage, but countless fans have welcomed Elvis via facsimile into their own nuptials. A chapel on Las Vegas Boulevard began offering Elvis-themed ceremonies within months of Presley's 1977 death. And in the decades since, tens of thousands of couples have exchanged vows before an Elvis stand-in. For as long as I've been alive, some brand of Elvis has always remained on call in Las Vegas, day or night, to walk a customer down the aisle toward their intended, to serenade the wedding party, and to legally pronounce spouses by the powers vested in him by the great state of Nevada. A dozen tiny chapels along Las Vegas Boulevard offer Elvis wedding packages, from the historic wee Kirk of the Heather to the high-rise chapel in the sky. In 2015, Viva Las Vegas Wedding Chapel told the New York Times that over half its annual bookings requested Elvis officiants. Even amid 2020's COVID woes, when Las Vegas went into lockdown, the chapel offered drive-up, no-contact weddings with an, with an Elvis in rhinestones, sideburns, and spangly face mask. At the Graceland Wedding Chapel, where I booked our package, owner and full-time Elvis minister Brendan Paul weds an estimated 4,500 couples annually. And in 2019, he also officiated a man's union to his motorcycle. Paul conducts each ceremony in a bedazzled jumpsuit of red, white, or black. And when he's off shift, other Elvises on the payroll conduct 2,500 additional ceremonies, all in a church not much larger than my living room. Along with the Chapel Kings, ordained Elvises offer themselves a la carte all over Clark County. And Elvis can marry you in the strip, above the strip in a helicopter, in front of the Welcome to Fabulous Las Vegas sign, on the Caesars Palace Ferris wheel, or in the very building where Elvis staged his historic concert residencies. Depending on your preference, the Elvis that binds you for eternity to another person or a motorbike can do so in several languages, including Hebrew and American Sign. He can be jumpsuited, Hawaiian shirted, or young and vigorous in gold lame. He can be 4 feet tall. He can identify as a woman. He can even be a zombie back from the dead just for your special day. The list of Elvis wed lovers includes many celebrities: Aaron Neville, John Bon Jovi, and 2/3 of the Thompson twins have all taken vows before Vegas Kings. And while these baby boomer stars are old enough to remember the original, younger celebs like Cara Delevingne and Lily Allen, millennials born long after Elvis left the planet, have also rented impersonators for their recent ceremonies. When singer Joe Jonas wed Game of Thrones actor Sophie Turner at Vegas's Little White Wedding Chapel, their 5-figure service included ring pops for wedding bands, Diplo as the DJ, and impersonator Jesse Garon as Elvis, presiding over it all. But how did Elvis end up married to weddings? What is it about a man who divorced 6 years after his own hitching that so deeply connects him to saying, "I do"? Presley's music, still the best aspect of his long cultural shadow, must at least partially contribute. Though his love songs are often eclipsed in public memory by the raucous up-tempo hits, Elvis was a skilled balladeer. A few love songs on his catalog are borderline indestructible. It's Now or Never. I'll hold you in my heart till I can hold you in my arms. Spotify is overrun with covers of his perfect Can't Help Falling in Love with You, a 1961 update of an 18th century melody that was revamped by the same pair of cousins who wrote the English lyrics to The Lion Sleeps Tonight. The song features one of the moodiest bridges of any pop ballad, And as for opening lines, few outshine the euphonic sneak attack of, "Wise men say only fools rush in." Artists of varied skill levels have tried out the song, everyone from Bob Dylan to UB40 to some Irish group called Lick the Tins. All their versions retain the soft push built into the tune, gentle yet insistent as it advances from bar to bar. Can't Help Falling is a magical song, and I have borne witness to its sorcery. 3 summers ago, I was stuck at this karaoke bar near Aberdeen, Washington, feeling lonely among the renditions of I Just Had Sex and Let the Bodies Hit the Floor. When a college-aged kid in a snapback hat took the mic and fired up Can't Help Falling in Love with You. And right away, a 50-something couple who had arrived on a scooter began slow dancing right next to him, and as the pair put their hands into the back pockets of each other's jorts, the whole room turned starry. And then later that night, the young singer helped me win an axe in a pull tab raffle. So magic! But none of these covers, not even the Karaoke Kid, can compare to the awe-struck beholding embedded into Elvis's performance. He recorded the song exactly 17 years before the day I was born for the film Blue Hawaii, in which Elvis croons the ballad to a grandma sitting in a rattan peacock chair. Entourage member Alan Fortas describes an uninspired studio session for Can't Help Falling in his memoir that took 29 takes and a tempo rearrangement before Elvis felt satisfied. Though Colonel Parker was loath to release the song, Can't Help Falling hit #2 on the Billboard charts, and in his concert years, Elvis closed nearly every performance with a rendition, including his notorious final show at the end of June 1977, which, according to a recent and mortifying conversation with my mother, is also the weekend I was conceived. Whenever I hear Can't Help Falling in Love or even conjure the tune in my mind, my insides calm a bit. The song, like much of the Elvis canon, played on oldie stations, commercials, and sitcoms throughout my childhood. Its words and music were part of my cultural awareness before I developed conscious memory, which makes me wonder what subliminal lessons on coupling it might have taught me. The vocal melody presents love in a way that's easy for everyone to sing, but difficult to master, which seems about right. According to the 68 words that comprise its scant lyrics, falling in love first leads to the joining of hands, and then of whole lives. And after so many listens, Elvis's smitten, polished voice lives inside me along with these lyrical sentiments. As a proposing lover, his baritone is honey deep and sober, offering marriage as a foregone conclusion, as unadorned and unavoidable as rivers finding the sea. In many ways, the song is a vow in and of itself. And adolescent as its words may be, they're still classier than the kinds of vows David has sworn to me in the past. The year I graduated my master's program, my only job offer was in a conservative Michigan town with terrible winters and few prospects for bartender/playwrights like him. And when my panicked indecision reached a boiling point, David grabbed my hand and said in his soberest voice, "Baby, I would live with you in a vat of warm hot dog water." And once, while we watched a pair of friends tearily exchange their personally written vows, David turned to me and whispered the vow that he had just written instead of paying attention. "This ring means that I own you," he hissed. It gets worse. While I smacked him with my wedding program, "And if, like an animal in a trap, you chew off a foot to escape, please know that I would be happy with just your foot." He pulls this psycho lover routine at most weddings. I suspect that it's his own way of diffusing the strangeness of watching our circus of friends shoehorn themselves into the role of traditional coupling for one fancy and expensive day. How weird, for instance, to watch our pal who swallows fire for a living vow to honor and keep her heavily pierced beloved, who's a tattoo artist that used to deal trucker speed in the bathroom of the Starbucks where we both worked in college. My vows to David are less colorful and usually silent. When we're at home on the couch watching Bob's Burgers or whatever, I'll look down at my hand in his, and this half prayer will pop into my head. Please let me be holding this hand just like this on the day that I die. Last weekend, I got some very sad news, and I ran upstairs to find David reading in bed, and I burrowed under the covers, pressed myself close to him, and squeezed his hand until I felt a little bit better. Darling, so it goes. Some things are meant to be. In the movies, including many of Elvis's 31 films, women are always begging their reluctant men to commit, but if anyone kept the two of us unmarried, it was me. I never felt a staunch aversion to marriage, but in my 20s it felt wrong to want to be something only legally available to pairings of certain citizens, and only to pairings at that. And by the time marriage equality laws repaired some of that, the whole framework seemed pretty unnecessary to my life. David moved into my crappy Pittsburgh apartment in 2003, and it took only a month for me to know I never wanted him to leave. Even my own family thinks he's out of my league. When we visited my father, it's true, when we visited my father shortly after we shacked up, my dad popped a bottle of champagne to celebrate the fact that his only daughter had actually convinced David to stick around. It was 10 in the morning. Over the years, David and I have casually thrown around concepts for a traditional wedding event, usually after returning from one that was either fabulous or boring. But where in the country would we stage it? Which one of our bonkers friends would make it through the wedding toast without weeping or barfing? What would make a better first dance? Etta James's Set Fire to the Cornfields or the Pretender's Message of Love? I once told David that I refused to marry him, this is not in the essay, unless he did a shot-for-shot remake of the Ashford and Simpson Solid as a Rock video because I feel like it really is what our relationship is like. And so then when my mom for years was like, why aren't you married? I'm like, solid as a rock. He's coming at the end of the conference, and so you can sing that song to him. Yeah, I'm wasting time, sorry. Okay. Okay, so what song were we gonna dance to? Not that one. Elvis and Priscilla danced to an accordion cover of Love Me Tender at their reception, which also featured a breakfast banquet of oysters, Rockefeller, and candied salmon. The party's 100-person guest list included surprisingly few members of Elvis's crew. Most attendees were music execs or friends of the Colonel, like Parker's best gambling buddy, Red Fox, who told the Las Vegas Sun, "This is the best thing that's ever happened to me." The truth is, were David and I to traditionally marry, the guest list would swell with our huge families and friend networks, which are full of rifts and factions and outside personalities and old beefs. And too many wedding stories involve the couple dashing around, extinguishing the emotional flare-ups of others, which to me seems like an even bigger waste of money than an oysters breakfast buffet. And Elvis was in a similar boat for his wedding, which several members of his entourage flew to Las Vegas to attend, only to have the Colonel disinvite them from the tiny hotel ceremony at the very last minute. Red West, a founding Memphis mafioso and the future co-star of that cinema classic Roadhouse, was among those cut from the list on the morning of the ceremony. Adding insult to injury, West and his wife took the same return flight as Elvis's father and other attendees who ignored them on the plane. It took West years to forgive the family, whom he had known since his days with Elvis at Hume's High, and some say the tell-all book that West published the month before Elvis's death proves that he never forgave Presley. If I'm being honest, though, the true reason for that my own mega wedding never happened is all in my own head. I've watched enough TLC to know that, as a bride, I would be expected to orchestrate a spectacle. There are actual TV series with 10-season runs of women attending strangers' weddings and then openly judging the aesthetics. One benefit to waiting until midlife to marry is the self-knowledge that comes with age, and so it is with great confidence that I deem myself incapable of presentational polish. I'm not detail-oriented enough, despite my impossible standards, and I often panic in the face of the simplest decisions. Even this sham Elvis wedding that I planned for David and myself came with production stresses. I waited too late to book the service, and then the only slots left at Graceland Chapel were either midday or well after dinner, and this caused hours of pointless fretting about how we would entertain our 5 easygoing guests, 4 of whom had eloped in Vegas themselves. Adding to my woes was the fact that the bride and groom are expected to dress for the affair, unless we made a hard pivot and booked one of the clothing optional wedding packages available through a website I found called Naked Vegas Weddings USA. And I did put this in the essay, but I was just thinking, I never thought about this. If you request an Elvis minister to perform at Naked Vegas Weddings USA, is he naked too? I don't know. Somebody should get married and find out. David looks good in anything off the rack if it's slim cut, so finding his outfit was straightforward. Uphold the no necktie proviso and add one pair of dressy black jeans. We also splurged on a replica of Elvis's brocade wedding jacket, purchased from Presley's beloved Memphis clothier, Lansky's. After a quick mall run for a dress shirt, the groom was set. Men are so damn lucky. I kept my own shopping a secret, much like Priscilla did. She scoured the LA boutiques under a wig and a pseudonym, bringing along TCB boy Charlie Hodge as her decoy fiancé. The dress that she found, a conservative number with beaded gauzy sleeves and a flowing bodice, is on display at Graceland next to Elvis's getup. Both the gown and its accompanying satin slippers are bafflingly tiny. A mouse's fancy pajamas. I have 5 inches and at least 50 pounds on the young Miss Beaulieu, and my shoulder width rivals her fiancé's. I'm also unfamous, 40-something, and on a budget, so our experiences diverged widely. One ill-fated Friday in November, I drove to a used bridal shop in Portland called something like Better Luck Next Time. And pulled the only 6 dresses in my size that didn't sport Princess Diana trains. Too embarrassed to admit that I needed help, I lugged the white draperies into the dressing room myself. After brushing off the salespeople and stripping down to an old bandeau bra and black Spanx, my fingers couldn't reach half the hooks and zippers, and then I left the store swallowing tears. And in the wake of that disaster, I vowed to dress outside the box and also to shop online. And I found a clingy ivory-laced jumpsuit from Tadashi Sozi that was marked down for Black Friday. It looked like a hybrid of a J-Lo costume and the Demon Gozer's outfit from Ghostbusters. So needless to say, we had a bingo. But the fun didn't stop there. Since the jumpsuit's illusion neckline hit below my sternum, I needed an alternative strategy to keep my breasts where public decency required them. Add to this my aspiration to immobilize the lava lamp of flesh between my belly button and my knees, and I ended up spending more hours Googling scary foundation garments than I did finding the actual wedding outfit. I tried to tell myself that I didn't need any trusses, because it would be more Elvis-like to bulge from my white jumpsuit. But despite my keeping this wedding on the low, I still wanted to look as hot as possible. If only I had a Bill Ballou, the infamous designer of Elvis's perfect black leather comeback special 2-piece and all the spangled onesies that followed. Elvis's Vegas jumpsuits are so iconic that mega fans have named them the Cisco Kid, the Concho, and my favorite, the Mad Tiger. A custom Ballou design for my one-night run at Graceland Chapel would have been a guaranteed showstopper, with Ballou's signature stretch gabardine offering me enough range of motion to karate kick my way down the aisle. After a fruitless scouring of the global undergarment market, I texted my oldest friend, Patrick, in an act of desperation. Pat is another Elvis nut, and one of the few folks we invited to the wedding because there's no way in hell he'd miss it, although he refused to let me call him my matron of honor. Pat runs a small theater company and deals with costume design for his job, and his chic wife often posts photos of herself in various strapless and backless looks. And when they married a decade ago in a renovated air brake factory, he looked like an Italian sports car ad, and she looked like a Khaleesi, and I cried so hard giving my toast that the father of the bride asked if I was having a nervous breakdown. Pat is the closest thing I have to a best girlfriend, and he'd know what to do. Boob tape, dude, he said right away. I help Eileen with it sometimes. Just make sure to buy the good stuff and don't let yourself get too sweaty. Do you even know who you're talking to? I shrieked. The phone was slippery in my grip while we spoke. Just practice a few times beforehand and look on YouTube or something, he was yelling into the phone now. And stop talking to me about this kind of shit, Jesus. And so, where David merely had to throw his Lansky's jacket into a garment bag, I spent the 2 Saturdays prior to our Vegas wedding watching videos of shirtless influencers explain with their vocal fry and upspeak how to tether my breasts to my clavicle using beige adhesive, doubling up on the strips at certain stress points like my chest was a shop window in a hurricane. That is a ridiculous place to stop, but guess what? That's where I'm going to stop. Thank you for listening. Thank you. And now the moment you've all been waiting for. Keep it going for Maurice Carlos Ruffin!
Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, Elena. I'll have you know that I have made sandwiches with peanut butter and bananas on them. So, good evening, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the last day of Swanee? The first day of Swanee? What day is this? I can't remember. How's everybody feeling tonight? Y'all look pretty good. So, we never know what to read, right? But I was inspired partially by my mentor, Alex Chi, and I was thinking about ancestors. And I've been doing this project for a bit where I want to make a book that somehow pays homage to my women ancestors. And I've been doing research, genealogical research, trying to track down people's births and deaths and locations and, loves and hates and passions and those sort of things. One of the things about being African American in this country is that often when you go back in time past a certain day, you hit like a brick wall. Maybe it's the Civil War, maybe it's a little bit before that, the early 1800s, it gets kind of sketchy. And I've heard several writers talk about this. Toni Morrison, for example, about you have a choice to make at that point. You can just give up or you can keep on going. And actually, Jakira Diaz mentioned that in her talk about using the imagination to fill in those blank spaces. So that's what I'm doing here. The book that I'm writing is a family epic that starts in about 1844, imagining my great ×5 grandmother growing up in a New Orleans, which of course is in the enslaved South, but a city where half the black people were actually quite free and quite wealthy in those interactions. So that's part one. And what happened is the draft has gotten so big, I was split into 3 books. So the second book is set in the 1940s to the 60s, following my grandmother's generation, when they would have fought to become the first African Americans to be police officers in New Orleans in the 1940s and 50s. We had black cops back in the 1800s and 1900s, and then they kicked them all out. And then the third part of the book is set in the future, on the 400th anniversary of New Orleans, 2118. Tonight I'm going to read from part 2, and let's see how it goes. This will be about 16 to 21 minutes, depending on how fast my heart beats. All right. Doris, January 2nd, 1945. Escape. Annie could mark the passage of the prior 17 years by fights with her daughter, right back to the first one, when infant Doris bit Annie's nipple hard enough to make her bite her own tongue. Annie had been possessed first by a spirit to smack the child, then a spirit to curse. Instead, she gritted her teeth and stared at the red deco clock on the kitchen wall. Doris relished a tussle, liked to see Annie perplexed. Indeed, Annie found herself in a fiendishly difficult situation now. Doris wanted out of the house, while Annie was the one who suggested she go. They were in agreement, and that more than anything felt to them both like walking across a greased pipe in the dark. Doris sat at the kitchen table of the house Annie rented for their family. Annie was still in her work clothes, the blue-gray dress and white apron she wore when cleaning houses. Her other thumb was hooked on the apron string, a bit of body language that has always said, "Don't mess with me," to Doris. Doris, of course, saw that unacknowledged body language as a challenge. "I'm giving you a chance to change your mind," Annie said. "You don't have to go nowheres." Ella was sitting across from Doris, her eyes huge. Doris's sister was younger by 2 years, a freshman at John McDonough 35, the same high school where Doris was a senior. For Doris's part, she thought it was important to demonstrate to Ella the importance of standing firm. Ella was a doormat. She needed spine lessons. Annie was thankful that Doris's ways hadn't rubbed off on the younger of her daughters. Annie was especially proud when, out of the corner of her eye, she saw Ella shaking her head in warning, her good, helpful girl always on her side. Doris shot up from her chair. Her choice was clear. On the one hand, she could do the laundry list of things Annie demanded, go with them to church twice a week, help around the house without complaint, stop hiking up her skirts, throw away the boy shorts she had traded with a classmate last month, pay attention in school, stop back-talking the poor teachers, read the Bible religiously, and not with laughter. Nobody would even kiss that lady. So how she had a baby when she was 100 years old? Stop back-talking Annie and stop threatening to quit school. And if she did, then find a good job or a decent husband or both. And stop being so fast. But slow was death for Doris. Slow was the poison mouse Doris collected that very morning in the cupboard. Doris's mother and Ella had been afraid of the lifeless body, so Doris scooped it up in a bare hand and took it out to the galvanized garbage can on the side of the house. Slow was being afraid. Slow was being timid. Slow was wearing that apron and cleaning those houses and having sore feet, a hurtful back, and fainting spells from washing clothes in the furnace of a New Orleans summer. The event that led to this showdown was wrapped in cherry-flavored irony. It was a sweet, literally, that set things in motion. Just yesterday, a Sunday afternoon, the neighbor, Mrs. Patton, must have seen Doris kissing someone in the alley between two houses nearby. Mrs. Patton, that busybody, must have told Annie about the boy. They were in raincoats with the cowls pulled up. And Doris did it because it felt like a fun thing, but the kissy was no boy. Those soft lips belonged to June, Doris's close companion since, well, forever. Doris had shared candy with her, a gumdrop. And June had grabbed her hand and said, "Kiss me," just like that, "kiss me," which Doris took as a dare. It didn't matter that Doris's answer to most dares was yes. She enjoyed the moment. June, her skittish sidekick June, was a very good kisser. And so the sparks had gone off, all over the back of Doris's head, which stopped her from seeing that they were being watched. And now Annie wanted Doris to change all her ways or be shipped off to stay with Auntie Byrne in the country. Now, don't say nothing crazy. Ella held her hand up towards Doris across the table. Ella knew this was a hopeless cause. Doris took encouragement as encouragement and opposition as encouragement. Her sister was going to do whatever was flying around in her mind, whatever mischievous thing like a baby with a little gun, adorable but also. Doris cocked her head and imitated Annie's pose, hand on hip and all. Doris had the feeling of something in the attic after bedtime and being unsure if it was a rodent or the mating call of that which crawled into her head whenever she dreamed. "Fine," Doris said, "fine." She sat. "No need to blow your top, Mama. I'll go stay with Auntie. She makes the best beans and rice anyway." Doris watched the anger in Annie's face melt. Doris had struck on two fronts, the equivalent of two slaps, one forehand and one back. As to the first slap, Doris knew Annie didn't want her to go away. The daughter leaving the city, leaving their home, was a defeat for the mother, a sign that Annie couldn't raise her own. In conversations that Doris would never hear, Doris knew that Auntie Byrne would question Annie's child-rearing. The slap would echo onward, even when Doris wasn't around. And the second slap, that related to red beans. Annie took pride in all of her meals, but especially her beans. A pot of them were waiting for their mouths that very moment. Steaming, succulent beans. The kind of beans that made the inside of your nose twitch. Waiting to be consumed beans. Appreciable beans. Annie's beans were perfect in every possible way. And saying that Annie's older sister was better at red beans and rice was a lie, and especially cruel, even for Doris. Doris regretted it the moment she said it. Annie's whole face was hot, but she couldn't be mad at Doris for calling her bluff. It was Annie who had taught Doris how to play whist. She had taught her child the importance of remembering which cards had already been played. She had taught her daughter to take her opponent's cards with verve. And now Doris had a stacked hand. Annie muttered and then spoke. All right, you're going then. Go wait on the porch. I'm calling the car man right now. Ella looked from Annie to Doris in astonishment, but neither moved. Out of a sense of falling, Ella stood to right herself so that all three of them were standing and leaning on that table. Ella saw Doris's canvas suitcase, which Annie had Doris pack. Surely only to prove a point. Next to the stove, the bag was crammed to the maximum. It bulged. Don't you touch that bag, Elle, Annie said. You stay in here. She won't be big. She can carry her own. Ella gawked. Although the younger, she was taller and larger than Doris. She had come to take pride in helping out with heavy things, but she didn't want to touch that bag anyway. She imagined the handle might be too hot to touch, hot as the bottom of that steel pot bubbling with the beans. Doris lifted her chin. I have it, sis. Thank you. Doris went to the porch and sat on the steel chair, which was freezing cold against her bare legs. She had been in the middle of dares like this too many times to count. If Annie had said Doris was afraid to jump into the Mississippi, Doris wouldn't have been satisfied until someone dove in to pull her out. She couldn't swim. All it would take for her was to go back into the kitchen and say she was sorry. Annie would be mad that she had to give $1 to the taxi for the trouble of coming out to the house. Doris might be grounded for a day or two, but that would be the end of it. Doris hugged herself against the chill. It wasn't windy, but it was January, and the air was salty, wet, and frostbitten like the way the fish market smelled. Doris wanted to be free of the weight of it. Her mother was always draped over the shoulders of her life like a bear rug. She just couldn't stand it anymore. Ella walked out onto the porch. Mama said, give you this. It was a church envelope, and Annie kept a stack of those so that when she went to hear those sermons and the preacher asked for 10% tithes, all she had to do was take the fold out of her purse and drop it in the tray. That there's enough for your bus ticket and something to eat, she said. Doris laughed, but she didn't sound as confident as she wanted to sound. She felt she was letting Ella down with any wavering at all. It sounded good to me. You ain't really about to leave, are you? Ella said in a whisper. Oh, so you just want me to crawl back in there on my knees? Just go inside and hug her, Ella said. Ella Marie Barnes, get your behind back in here, Annie said from inside. It don't take that long to hand over a packet. Ella watched Doris, who just smiled that crazy, wicked smile of hers. And this, more than anything, caused the panic inside of Ella's chest to harden and spin. Ella knew that if there was one way to get through, it was through contact. The Barnes women, including herself, were moved most by touch. Ella grabbed Doris's hands. Doris sat back, but didn't try to shake Ella's grip. Don't leave me like this. It don't make no sense at all. Doris raised her chin. She's the one not making sense. I need you to use your mind. I'm not supposed to be the baby sister here, God damn it, though. And Doris's mouth fell open. Ella never spoke that way. Not Ella, who actually enjoyed arriving at church early to sit near the front pew. Doris heard a car coming. Sure enough, it was a taxi man, and sometimes the choices made themselves. Doris didn't like to see the hurt in Ella's eyes, but she'd be fine. Ella and Annie were twins in looks and spirit. Hell, they'd have it easier without Doris in the middle, always knocking them this way and that. Doris got up. Anything else? Doris asked. When are you going to love yourself as much as everyone else does? Ella asked. Doris picked up her suitcase. Take care of Mama, Doris said. She stepped away from the house, which felt like being pushed from a balcony. Still doing all right out there? All right. 15 minutes later, Doris was at Union Station having second thoughts. A few facts sat on her shoulders. She had never been away from New Orleans by herself. She had never ridden on a bus or a train far beyond her neighborhood. The terminal was full of white people, men and women in pretty dresses and sharp suits. At school, she was popular. When she entered a room, her classmates took notice. And yet here, she felt like a crumb floating in used cooking oil, useless and unwanted. She knew no good would come of her talking to Annie that way. Why then did it feel so good? Doris made her way again across that massive tile floor in the train station. A bird had gotten high inside of the room, and it flew a tight circle, landing clumsily on that large clock. On the destinations board, she saw the bus to Lafayette, where she imagined Auntie Byrne and her cousins sitting on their porch with all the kids, rocking in the dust. The phone would ring any moment from Annie's call, and there'd be much head shaking and tut-tutting. A group of women were lined up by the doors that led out onto the train platform. The women were in khaki uniforms with smart matching hats. Teachers? Nurses? Doris walked to the ticket desk where a middle-aged white man was also staring at the uniformed women. He shook his head. "Where you going, gal?" he asked. "I'd like a bus ticket to Lafayette, sir," she said. You're not with those girls over there, No, sir, Doris looked. "I'm not with them." "Good. Pretty colored gal like you," he said, scanning her body. "It just figures you'd have better things to do here on the home front." A couple of the uniformed women were laughing, and Doris hardly noticed that she had stepped away from the ticket desk without buying anything at all. She wanted a closer look. She needed to see these women. There was a lever on the wind, a wave that moved through the world from time to time and guided spirits like Doris's. If that old bigot of a ticket man had something against those women, then that made her even more curious about them. "You lost us something?" a woman said from behind her. The woman was in uniform. She was slight and a bit shorter than Doris, although Doris wasn't particularly tall herself. The lady seemed older, like Annie's age. But then again, anybody over the age of 25 seemed old to Doris. It hit Doris that this woman was colored, but the group was mixed. At school, at church, on the bus, on the streetcar, in all the dusty little moments of her life, she was pushed into the black corners of everything, as if by a broom. And although she loved those corners, she hated being confined to them. She lived her life off to the side, in the peanut galleries, but not this woman in this group. They were all mixed in together, black and white, getting on a train and going where they wanted to go. If that wasn't escape, then what was? "Who are y'all?" Doris asked. The Salvation Army or something? The woman said. "Believe it or not, we're the Army. We're wax. Going to train up to Iowa by way of Chicago. Girls in the military? Women," the woman said, "throwing our piece for our country. It ain't just the men folks' job to stand up for our people." And that last comment was what did it for her. Doris's throat was dry, but she gathered herself. How do I go with y'all?" Doris asked. "Say again?" I want to join." "You have to be 18 years old to enlist." I'm 22, Doris lied, realizing that in sounding overzealous, she probably seemed even younger than she actually was. Still, most of her friends said she seemed older by how she carried herself. Maybe 22 was a stretch, but her mouth, like her writing hand, always moved faster than her mind. Oh well. Third Officer Sammy Gorman was the woman staring at the girl we know as Doris Barnes. And she was no fool. She herself had run away from home many years before. And although this girl was clearly too young, She still had on her uniform skirt. Who did she think she was fooling? Sammy knew how it felt to thirst for freedom. The girl didn't seem like she was being slapped around or anything. Nah, she was probably just a match. The kind of person who started little fires every place she went. What place better than the Women's Army Corps? What organization could mold and direct the energies of someone like her better than us? Yes, Major Phillips would like this one very much. She would remind her of Sammy herself. You know, Sammy was a wild one when she enlisted back in the summer of '42, and this girl surely wouldn't be the first questionable enlistment in the history of the service. But first, there was something she needed to know. Miss, what did you say your name was? Doris Barnes of Tremay. Well, Miss Doris Barnes of Tremay, you're just too young, all right? The military, we don't got time for babysitting. We're a very serious outfit. Now, you take care of yourself, you hear, girl? Sammy adjusted her hat and turned away sharply, like she was leading a marching unit. Doris grabbed the woman's wrist, and Sammy stopped cold and looked at the hand holding on to her. You better explain yourself. You don't just grab an officer of the United States Army. Doris could hardly breathe, let alone talk, but she couldn't let this chance slip past, this one and only chance. Please, I only want to help. I'm good at a lot of things, whatever y'all need me to do, such as cleaning, sewing. I can cook too, casserole, gumbo, red beans. Even as she spoke, red beans. Doris noted that those were all skills Annie had taught her. What did she, Doris, own? What has she taught herself? I write poems. I'm a reporter on the school newspaper, too. I thought you were out of school. Was a reporter. Sammy chuckled. Her ruse had worked. She ran that game on her niece so many times. It almost felt too easy, but she had her answer. This Doris was serious about enlisting. Well, as serious as a what? 16, 17-year-old could be about anything? I'm Third Officer Gorman. Sammy held her hand out. You mean I can go? You're lucky, Sammy said. I'm a recruiter. Doris gasped. Then her lips worked frantically as she struggled for the words. What do I do? You can shake my hand. Doris grabbed the woman's hand with both of her own. Come on, we'll get you a ticket. Later that night, as the train trundled just south of Memphis, Doris was curled up by the window of the sleeper she shared with one other person. Her cabin mate, a girl named Irene from Grand Isle, was asleep. Doris realized that the bus she was supposed to catch to Lafayette out in the country would have already arrived at its destination by that point. Auntie Byrne would have waited for her at that terminal. When Doris didn't show, she'd have called Annie and Ella, and they, including the cousins and their children, the whole congregation of them would have worried about where she had gone. Doris had disappeared into the night before, had gone over to June's family's fancy house on Esplanade Avenue, or walked around Congo Square in the middle of the city with a stick in her hand in case somebody messed with her. But this was different. She was gone, out of the city, out of the state. She felt like the rubber band that tied her to Annie and Ella was being stretched, and at any moment, it would just